Do you all know me? पक्का नहीं? अच्छा पता है, चलिए लगता फेमस हो गया हूँ नहीं. So you all have decided to take history as an optional paper? You all have decided it, or I know you are just hunting around? Achha, you have just decided. Okay. So have you seen the paper of 2018? How many of you have seen the paper of 2018? Nobody has seen yet? फिर कैसे हिस्ट्री ऑप्शनल ले लिया है? इतनी क्यूरियोसिटी अगर आपके अंदर नहीं है कि आपको पेपर देखनी चाहिए एक बार, तो आई थिंक दिस इज़ नॉट फेयर एट ऑल. आई थिंक यू मस्ट सी द, बिकॉज देयर शुड बी ए क्यूरियोसिटी फॉर द पेपर, राइट? या कि what kind of paper they have asked, because all those who have decided to take history as an optional paper, I think you must be having some some idea of the subject. It is not this must be happening, so must be having some idea of history and the syllabus which are being asked. What are the papers, what are the roughly what are the topics which are being asked. So somehow if you have decided to take history as an optional paper, so I think that curiosity was very much important. And before I come to those normal kind of things, as this is the sort of first class also, right? So I'll just ask you few of the things. Whenever you have decided to take any optional, right? So you need to first check the syllabus, right? Without checking the syllabus, never decide to take the optional paper, the first thing. And the second thing, that you just at least go through the question papers of previous years, at least for the past 5-6 years, So these 5-6 years, 6 years are very important. And in fact, once you people have decided to take history as an optional paper or any other optional paper that if you people are taking, right, in that case the first thing that you need to do, that you must see the question papers of the previous year, because somehow it is giving you the insight that are you capable to do justice with the paper or not. Because if somehow if you find, because I have met so many people, those who have decided to take initially one paper, and then after preparing for 1 or 2 years, then they realize this paper is not their cup of tea, and in that case what they did actually, they decided to change their paper. Though some examples are there, after changing their paper they have met the record, right, such as the topper of this year only, right. So he was initially writing the examination with public administration, and I think he cleared also with this public administration, and then he again changed the subject after clearing the examination, anthropology, and then he again cleared it, and somehow he just met the history. So somehow it is not, I am not saying it is not possible, but I think this is just wastage of time, that you are choosing one optional paper, and then you are again deciding, or again you have decided to change the optional paper. So somehow these are just wasting your time. And one thing that should be always in your mind, that UPSC is always about 1 attempt or maximum 2 attempts, right. बहुत ज़्यादा अगर लिखते हैं तो 3 अटेम्प्ट बहुत होते हैं मेरे हिसाब से, ठीक है. अगर आप 5 वर्षीय योजना बना के चल रहे हैं कि ठीक है अभी जा रहे हैं यूपी से, पहले होता था, ऐसा नहीं है, पहले होता था when we used to give the paper. So once you have said this in your family that okay, now I want to decide, I want to prepare for the UPSC, so they were actually ready for the 5 years, and that is why in Mukherjee Nagar it was known as Panchvarshya Yojana. Till 5 years nobody was asking your result. After 5 years they start asking result कि भाई 5 साल हो गया, अब क्या है, अभी तो 5वां साल एक योजना जो है पूरी होने वाली है. तो ऐसा टारगेट अभी नहीं है, बिकॉज नाउ आई होप यू माइट हैव नोटिस सो मेनी पीपल आर क्लियरिंग द एग्जामिनेशन जस्ट फर्स्ट अटेम्प्ट ओनली, राइट. व्हाई? बिकॉज दे आर वेरी अटेंटिव, दे आर जस्ट नो कि, or somehow they have found the key of the UPSC, and that is very important. It is not for optional. Even in the general studies you need to understand the nature of the question, right, nature of the paper, nature of the syllabus, and that is going to help you a lot to clear the examination. So that kind of things you need to develop in you, and somehow that will help you to clearing the clear the examination. Anyways, I won't give you much lecture regarding other things. I'll come to the point. So basically, as you do know that this is basically the foundation course of history, right. That program has been designed for 2019. Well, and I have conducted so many workshops, right, and many people were there in the workshops also, and all those videos are there in the YouTube. So somehow you might have seen some of the videos of mine, I think earlier also. So here we'll basically we'll begin with the history only. I won't go for some unnecessary details. So suppose you have decided to take history as an optional paper. And in fact, I have told this many times to the students that whenever you are deciding to take any optional paper, normally people are not doing anything, any practice, any sort of homework, they are not doing it by their own, right. And there was some simply coming to the institutes, and sometimes what is happening, they are not even capable to understand the nature whatever is being taught. Like suppose you people have taken this history as an optional paper, and normally what is the idea that you people are getting from the seniors ki, okay, there are few books that you have to read, you need to read, and after reading those books somehow you will be able to clear the examination, or you will be able to score good in this optional paper. So, this is I think one of the biggest blunder or biggest mistake which is being done by the students. Whenever you are choosing any optional paper, right, you first thing that you need to understand what is the nature of the subject. Today you might have heard many times interdisciplinary, right. So, in fact, every subject is becoming interdisciplinary, and in fact that is true for history also. So, how can you differentiate your answer? Maybe suppose just take the issue of such as communalism, right. I think if you have seen the paper of general studies paper 1, you will find one question on communalism, one question on secularism, right. So, these kind of questions were asked, and now communalism is not a topic which should be dealt only in history, right. Communalism even could be dealt in social society, right. It could be discussed in political science as well, right. But when you are writing the same answer in history, there should be a different approach, and you will be able to understand the different approach only if you have understood the nature of the subject or the discipline. Whatever the papers that you are choosing as an optional paper, these all papers are basically certain disciplines being taught in universities, and whenever you are talking about any as such discipline, so it means that discipline is being run by certain historians or the respective people, right. Definitely we people are not running. To some extent I can say I am part of that, because I have also published many articles and in a process to publish a book as well, right. So, somehow I can say okay, to some extent I am I am eligible for that, but definitely you people do not understand the nature, and that is why the first thing which you are supposed to understand, that is the nature of the subject, because until and unless you do understand the nature of the subject, you will not be able to do justice with the questions which are being asked in the UPSC examination. That is why the in the first few classes what we people are doing, basically we people are just trying to understand the nature of this subject. So, when we say history, right, what do you understand? What is the meaning of history? Or this question itself is supposed to be a very prominent question. What is history? What is history? Nobody reads that. They all read from NCERT. So, they never learn about the nature of the subject, and if you are going somewhere to get the tuitions for this, in that case also people begin it with this ancient Indian history, because we understand ki okay, history means ancient India, medieval India, modern India and modern world as well, right. Part of syllabus, that is why we are doing like that, right. But I think this is not the reality, right. Somehow we need to understand the nature of the subject. If I am asking this question to you that what is history, what would be your answer? Yesterday's event, today and today's history. Okay, fine. Yesterday I just went to watch a movie. कौन सी movie आई? कोई भी नई movie में pictures नहीं. Now you are changing it. Changing it, right. So, now she is saying ki any significant event, right. So, any significant event may be important. Now, the another question arises here, how come you can decide ki this event is significant? That is the another question which is important, right. And if you think ki these are not the prominent questions for the historians, let me clarify you one thing. There were so many prominent historians, they have struggled for their whole life to answer this question only. What is history? Such as, is anyone having background from history? Yes. You have done your? Sorry? Graduation. Masters you haven't completed. Okay, fine. And when did you pass out? 15. So, what you have been doing for past 3 years? Nothing. Okay. That's a good thing to do actually. Right. So, I hope you might have heard about few names. If you have, maybe you might not have heard also. E.H. Carr, do you know about E.H. Carr? Right? Collingwood, R.G. Collingwood, do you know about him? R.G. Collingwood, कुछ नहीं सुना है सर, ठीक है? नहीं, अभी जानना भी नहीं है इसके बारे में, ठीक है? I'm just simply telling you about their names, and in fact, I'll discuss their contribution also. I'm not denying this fact. because if you need to understand the nature of the discipline, you need to understand their work also. So, R.J. Collingwood is there, Chattopadhyay is there, Keith Jenkins is there, right. So, there were so many historians, and these historians have not worked on any particular age or event. They have simply tried for the whole of their life to understand what exactly history is, right. And in fact, nobody is teaching even that in DU, right, because even I am part of this Delhi University, I am teaching in Gagi College. So, I do understand what is being taught what is being taught in university, right. So, I do understand that. So, somehow what is important, that yes, we need to understand the nature of the subject, and as I was telling you that there were so many people, those who have given lots of effort to understand this subject, right. What exactly history is, because history all the time kept on changing its meaning. If you understand this is what history is, so I think that is a wrong perception we do have. During the ancient period, there was a different perception for history. During the medieval period, there was a different perception for history, and when we entered into the modern, then there was a different perception, and after 19th century, you will find again the changes in the perception of history, and that is why history is also one of the subject which kept on changing its meaning, right, and that is why it is very important to understand what exactly history is. But as I am telling you that these questions became prominent only after 19th century, or only during the 19th century, right, and then these kind of questions became very important. But okay, I will come to this question later on, right, what is history, and somehow you won't be able to understand it right now. But let me ask you another question when it comes to the Indian history, right, because as you do know, there are two papers that we need to cover, right. Paper 1, that includes ancient and medieval India, and paper 2, modern India and modern world. These are the two papers, right, modern India, paper 1 and paper 2. So, once it comes to Indian history, so definitely there are so many books of history that I hope you must be knowing about those books. There are some popular books on Indian history such as R.S. Sharma, Upinder Singh, J.L. Mehta. कितना तो पता है आप लोगों को, ठीक है, it's very good actually, right. So, you people are knowing numbers of names of historians, and in fact all these historians are the basically contemporary historians. They all are somehow. R.S. Sharma died very I think three years back he died, otherwise he was also contributing in this history writing. So, these are the historians. So, if I am saying when did you find the beginning of Indian history writing, that is a very important question, that's a very important question. So, do you have any idea from where you find the beginning of Indian history writing? What was the name of the history book during this Indus Valley civilization? Unfortunately, whatever they have written, we haven't deciphered it, the script of IVC. So, there is no question arises for this here. So, anything else? Sorry? What kind of history was there? No, I am not asking about that. Unfortunately, what exactly history is, we do not know. I am simply asking about the books, right. Ultimately, this is a discipline, and this discipline we are learning through books. So, it means that historians are writing the books, we are learning the history through the books of historians, right. That is very important, we need to understand that, because if we understand whatever we have studied or whatever we know, that is history, that is, I just want to make you clear that is not history in fact, right. That is the question I just wanted to, I want to clarify you, right. This is not what called as history, and that is why whenever you are talking about history, so there is a period when from where you will find that people have started writing the history of India. Script. There was no history book. If there, you are not getting, I think, my question. I am simply not asking about history, and that is the, I am just telling you again and again, this is the confusion that you people are having, that whenever I say about history, you understand okay, ancient India, it is beginning from the prehistoric age, this is what called as history. Ras Tarangani. Okay, he is just telling name of one book that was written by Kalhana. Raj Tarangini, right? Written by, have you ever heard the name of this book? Kalhana's Raj Tarangini. That is supposed to be known as one of the earliest history book, but it is also having many limitations, and that is why we don't consider them, consider this book as a pure book of history on history, because I think you people are not reading Kalhana's Raj Tarangini for UPSC, or even in the graduation or post graduation, you people are not reading the book of Kalhana's Raj Tarangini as the history book. It means that cannot be included in the list of history book, right? Then I think this answer is also partially correct. Partially correct, I'll come to that point again why it is partially correct. Then Kitabul Hind, what was the period for Kitabul Hind? Century? 12th or 13th, just 10th century when Kitabul Hind was written, right? And it was written by Al-Biruni, right? And there were so many other books also which were written during that period, right? If you are talking about the medieval period, do you know the meaning of Tawarik? अच्छा नहीं जानते हो, तारीख तो जानते होंगे ना. Tariq has been pronunciated by the Persian people like Tawarik, right? So there were so many books written with this name, Tawarik A Firozshahi, right? So it is normally known as people do not know how to pronounce it, and that is why they very simply they are saying Tariq-e-Firozshahi. Okay, fine, that is also not problem, because in India the things are always changing, right? कोई भी चीज़ इंडिया आने के बाद बदल जाती है, तो ये भी बदल गया तो इसमें कौन सी बड़ी बात है. मोमोज बर्गर आप देख ही सकते हैं, ठीक है. दे ऑल आर चेंजिंग इट्स शेप साइज एंड एवरीथिंग, राइट. तल के बेचने लगते हैं, जो चीज़ रोस्ट होनी चाहिए, स्टीम्ड होनी चाहिए, वो हम तल के बेचते हैं. तो इंडियंस तो खैर इस मामले में ग्रेट है, ठीक है. तो दिस तारीख है फिरोजशाही. तो तारीख for Persian people, Tariq meant history, right? And that is why they were recording some of the events, and that is why they call it Tariq-e-Firozshahi, because this is the history of Firuz Shah, right? Or Firuz Shah Tughlaq, and that is how they put the name of that is why they put the name of like Tariq-e-Firozshahi or Fatuhat-e-Firozshahi. These kind of words have been used by them, right? So anyways, these books you people are also not reading while reading the history, right? So in fact, these people also cannot be considered in the list of history books, right? So I think this is not the right, this is also not the right answer. What else? No idea. I think you people very fresh, you people are very fresh and newly decided to take this on a, very recently you have decided to take this history as an optional paper, right? Okay, I am just telling you one story, and that story will make you very clear the things, right? Now these people are getting happy in the name of story, right? नहीं, ऐसा नहीं है. Okay. Anyways, I hope you must be knowing about British East India Company. British East India Company that came to India somewhere around 1600. Right. Okay, fine. And then what British East India Company was doing? It was trading with India, right? It did not have any other objective apart from the trade. And in fact, there was a long trade which was, there was a long history of trade between India and West, right? And that started even before the Christian era, and that was known as Indo-Roman trade. And Indo-Roman trade continued till the 5th century AD, right? And then that empire which was there in the Central Asia, called as basically the eastern part of Europe, called as Byzantine Empire, right? That empire declined, and with the decline of that empire, ultimately this trade also declined. And then it means that India lost its trade? No. After few centuries it got revived again, and it was revived again by the Muslim people, right? Basically the Arabian peoples, right? So now though people or the traders from the Central Asia, they started having trade with India, but somehow you must realize one more thing, that the period what I am discussing, that period is known for the feudalism in Europe. Maybe you don't understand feudalism right now, it's quite obvious, but feudalism is a sort of class in society, and that class is known as aristocratic class in the society, always had luxury life, right? So whatever the things which were being exported from India, these were being consumed by these people, the feudal aristocratic class, right? And what are the commodities which were being traded from India? Spice, right? Muslin. And what is muslin? Fine cotton or fine cotton clothes, fine cotton clothes, right? Normally clothes have been divided into two parts, maheen and kameen, right? These are two names, right? fine and coarse, right. So, India was always well versed in making the fine cotton clothes, right, and that is the reason that you will find that what is happening here, that now the Arabian people have started exporting from India or carrying from India the spices, the first thing, and the cotton clothes, right. And by the 7th and 8th century, India has started exporting even the silk clothes also, because by that time they have learned, right, how to make silk clothes, and that is why they started exporting even the silk clothes, right. So, now the Arabians started dominating in this particular trade, and somehow they were just carrying these stuff from India, and they were not consuming it, rather they were just selling these stuff in the European market, and Rome and Venice were supposed to be the most popular markets, and from there these stuffs were circulated in rest of the Europe, right. So, as I told you that there was definitely there was a high demand of the Indian clothes, because these were definitely beautiful, because Europe by that time did not know how to make the cotton clothes. Normally they were making the woolen, coarse woolen clothes, right. And in fact, I hope you can compare both this thing, right. So, somehow it was very tough to wear the woolen clothes, and that is why they are always liking the Indian clothes. And apart from that, spices was the another stuff. Spices, they did not consume the spices directly, rather they used to preserve their meat in the winter season, and that is why they needed the spices in a larger quantity, right. That is how this trade was, there. So, the Arabians, as you can understand, now the Arabians, what they are doing, they are just located here, right. They are trading with India, right, and they were selling the stuff to the Europe, right. And in fact, they are there in between, right. And in fact, if any European would have tried to come here, so they should have passed Mediterranean Sea and Red Sea, right. And Arabians knew that this trade is giving them huge benefit, and just because of that purpose, they never allowed the Europeans to pass through these channels, right. And I hope you must be knowing about the Horn of Africa. थोड़ा बहुत भी geography पढ़ा है तो Somalia, Eritrea, Ethiopia, these are the countries which are in the Horn of Africa. And I think you must be knowing about the survival in Somalia. That is they all are pirates, right, because there was no as such economy there, and that is why most of the time they are just they are just catching the ships which were passing through that path, and they were asking for the ransom to the governments or the companies, right. That is how they are surviving, and somehow the same thing was being done by the Arabian people, right. So, they never allowed any particular ship to pass, any European ship to pass through this way, and the reason was very simple. The reason was simple in a way that if the Europeans would have come here directly, in that case what would be the result? The licensing or the sort of brokerage that these people were having for this trade, that they won't be getting anymore, right. And this profit, you can't ignore that what kind of profit they had. They had a huge amount of profit, they were earning a huge amount of profit through this trade, and that is why they were not doing this, right. And they were never allowing the Europeans to come directly to India, and this trade continued till 15th centuries, right, or till 15th century, right. And then the Europeans realized that look, this is that phase which is known as the phase of mercantilism, right. And under this phase of mercantilism, there were many new changes which started taking place, such as new shipping industries, right. They have started making better ships, right. The navigations or the schools or the institutions which started teaching them about navigations, right. I hope you might have heard about Henry the Navigator, who was running an institution just to make them just to make the people learn about this navigation science and navigation ideas and all, right. And some other changes as well, such as the compass, that is one of the another invention, right. So, that was the Europeans got familiar with this compass during this particular period. So, somehow now they are capable of this navigation in a open sea, and that is why people have started hunting for different things, right. And one of the prominent hunt or prominent sort of will for them was how to find an alternative route to India, right, that they could bypass the Arabians to conduct direct trade with the Indian people. And as a result of that, what happened? Columbus tried for the first time, and what Columbus did? Columbus was a very smart fellow, ठीक है, उसने बोला दुनिया गोल है, ठीक है, तो बोला इधर से नहीं जाने देंगे, उधर से घूम के जाएंगे, ठीक है, अभी सही बोला उसने, बट बेचारे को ये नहीं पता था कि उधर बीच में अमेरिका पड़ता है. Nobody knew about America actually, right? Nobody knew about America. There's something which is called, which is being called as America. They didn't have any idea, and in fact, you must be knowing one fact, that America was highly uncivilized area, right? Because as far as India is there, so in India, China, there were certain kind of civilizations. America was completely untouched with that, and that is why nobody knew about America. So when he started moving towards that side, and he was just trying to take a complete round of the earth, and he just wanted to reach on India and Southeast Asian countries, because these were also the good sources of Indian spices, right. But he reached America, and when he reached America, then after some time he realized he has reached on a wrong place, and then he started calling it West Indies, and then there is a different history started, which is called as history of America, right. So that is a different history, right. So then this effort was done on 1492, and then finally there was another fellow called as Vasco da Gama, right. So Vasco da Gama, what he did actually, suppose this is Africa, so Vasco da Gama tried from this way to reach India, right. And that is why initially that point was discovered by Bartholomew Diaz, right. And now it has been, now this fellow Vasco da Gama reached India. He was a Portuguese fellow, right, Vasco da Gama. There is a long history. He was not Portuguese actually. Initially he was not one of the citizen of that country. Later on he became part of that, but somehow he reached India, and once he reached India, so he started trading with India through this route. And I am just telling you one fact that will make you understand what kind of profit they had in this trade. If he invested 1 rupee, in purchase, right, and on his sea voyages, then his profit was 60 rupees. So it was 600% profit, right. So now you just tell me one thing, what kind of profits the Arabians were making from this trade, right. Definitely these people were getting somewhere around 1000% profit, right, because now they have bypassed the brokers, right, or the middlemen, even though they had such kind of profit. So he came twice or thrice to India, right, and then gradually it opened the route for the rest of the Europeans, and rest of the Europeans also started entering into India. So Portuguese, and then Dutch, Danes, English, French, right, the 5 East Indian companies entered into India. They started having their trade with India, but very soon they realized one thing, the profit which they have imagined, right, now they were not capable of generating this profit. The reason is very simple, because somehow the only reason because of what the Arabians and the Portuguese initially make the profit, that was just because of the monopoly. You understand the monopoly? Initially there was only one buyer, numbers of sellers, and that is why there was the monopoly of the buyers, right. So whatever the prices they were fixing, the Indians were forced to pay, take the same amount, right. But once 5 buyers are there, in that case who is going to having monopoly? The Indians. Now Indians have started manipulating them as per their own interest, and that is why Indians were getting huge amount of benefit from this trade. And till I think I must say till 1760s, 1770s, right, the Indians were actually in a positive side, or in a surplus side, right. So somehow they now not having this monopoly, and that is why the European companies were not getting that amount of profit from this land, and that is why they struggle started in India, and they all wanted to actually finish their rivalries, right. And that is why there were so many things happen. Portuguese left the battlefield, or the this field much earlier, because they got interested in some other thing. They were more interested in Brazil, they got more interested in Carthage system, and that is why they left this venue. Only few areas which were under their control. Bombay was there, one of the prominent zone under their control, but later on they gave it to the British East India Company, right. The Dutch and then decided to go to Southeast Asian countries. So that is now also not there, right, and now only the French left. And then you must be knowing about this Anglo-Carnatic Wars, right, or the Carnatic Wars, Anglo-French War or the Carnatic Wars. And as a result of that, that there was a long history that we'll study, cover in the modern India. So finally what happened? The French also had to leave this country, except Pondicherry and few more, Yemen and Mahé. There were few areas which are under the control of French. And finally the dominance of the British East India Company was established. Perfectly fine. The story till here is there is no problem in the story. But the story did not remain same till 1760s, or we can say 1750s. 1750s and 60s, European company sorry, British East India Company was a private shareholding company, but government was also having certain interest in it, right. And that is why this monopoly was given to the company कि no other company could trade with India and Southeast Asian countries, only this company was entitled, right. And in fact, all the shareholders were making some good amount of profit, and that is why they all were very happy, and even they were giving some share to the government or the crown also. They all were very happy, but the situation did not remain same till after 1750s and 60s. Reason? Sorry? No, Battle of Plassey was the result of that. Battle of Plassey was result of that change. Acha, just tell me one thing. They were purchasing so many stuff to India, from India, right? And what they were giving, to the Indians in return, because Indians did not buying numbers of, they were not buying numbers of things from Britishers. उनको बहुत चीज़ें नहीं चाहिए थी, थोड़ी दारू वारू इधर अच्छी नहीं मिलती थी तो ले लेते थे उधर से, ठीक है, बाकी चीज़ें ज़रूरत नहीं थी इधर इतनी. वाइन खरीदते थे, कुछ ग्लास वेसल्स या ग्लासवेयर खरीदते थे. So these are the normal things that they were coming, but most of the deficit was fulfilled through gold and silver, that is known as bullions, right. So they were in return actually paying the bullions, and mind you, they were struggling a lot to get this gold and silver from Africa, from America, and then they were getting this bullion, and ultimately they were paying this bullion to India just in return, just for the spices and the cotton clothes and the silk clothes, right. But as I am telling you again and again, the situation did not remain same till 1950s, and 1750s and 60s are known for industrial revolution. And once this industrial revolution took place, so now we will find clearly the class of interest between two different sections in Europe, especially in Britain, right. So one section which generated the or which came up with the which came up with industrial revolution, and the earlier industrial revolution was in field of textile. They were also making the cotton clothes, right. So don't you find the class of interest between these two, because they were also producing cotton clothes, and in the British East India Company was also exporting the cotton clothes from here, right. So now there was a class of interest between these two, and that is why, and there was another reasons also, there was some parallelly some another reasons, because what happened actually, those British those service servants of the British East India Company, those who were coming to India, right, after serving for some years, they somehow accumulated huge amount of money, and once they were reaching there in Britain, they were buying the seats in the parliament, and gradually the numbers of these kind of members, which were normally known as Lord Sahab, right. I mean, it was a sort of sarcasm, which was because of that they were called like Lord Sahab, right. So these Lord Sahabs were increasing their numbers in the parliament, because now they had access to the money, and that is where gradually their number was increasing, and that is why the capitalist people in Britain, they were not liking this idea, because they simply thought in a way that there would be one day in House of Commons when these people would be in majority and the policies would be framed as per their own interest, and that is why they wanted to check this system, and that is why very regularly they started carrying this idea or telling this to the crown and some other people, look, we have to stop this process, we have to ban this trade which was conducted between India and England. And ultimately after this industrial revolution, the British government also got inspired by this, and finally the trade was stopped. Not the trade was directly stopped, they simply banned the Indian stuffs in Britain, right. अभी बोलते नहीं आएगा इधर, ठीक है. और दूसरा बुलियन का ट्रांसफर बैन कर दिया, बोला कि नाउ द बुलियंस वुड नॉट बी ट्रांसफर टू इंडिया. Now the British East India Company was capable of purchasing the Indian stuff only through that bullion, that they were getting the bullions from England, that is why they were capable of buying these stuff. Now they are not getting the bullions from England. So what was the solution then, right? So now they had to find the alternative source of their income from this territory only, from this land only, and that is where what happened, they started getting involved in these kind of activities like Battle of Plassey as one of the result of them. That, right. So they got involved in Battle of Plassey 1757, but they did not get much after the Battle of Plassey. Then they got involved in Battle of Buxar 1764, and finally 1765 the Treaty of Allahabad, right. And as per the Treaty of Allahabad, I hope you remember that the Diwani of Bengal. Now what is this Diwani? Land revenue collection rights. So, this land revenue collection right was basically they got from the Shah Alam II, the Mughal emperor, though it was he was just Badshah, Mughal Badshah for the sake of name only, right, because nobody was even carrying. उसकी हालत बहुत खराब है क्योंकि वो खुद दिल्ली इंटर नहीं कर सकता, because he knew कि once he entered into Delhi he will be killed, right, and that's the reason that he is not entering into Delhi. And finally, as per this official document, because Mughals were still considered as the Badshah of India or the emperors of India, and that is where this formal treaty was done. And after that they got the Diwani of Bengal, and Diwani was basically the land revenue collection right. So, I hope you can connect both the points. They were only interested in money. Why? Because they needed to run the trade. So, they were still interested in trade only, right. They simply wanted to run their trade, and that is the reason that they got the Diwani, and they were pretty happy with that. But very soon they realized one thing, ki if they are getting the next half of the administration, they will be able to generate more land revenue, right. That is the question, because of what they decided to come into the direct administration. Fine, they decided to come into the direct administration, that is perfectly fine, but what was the meaning of administration during 1770s or 1780s? That is the important question, because that time there was no welfareistic government, there was no notion or no concept of welfareistic government. So, that is why what they did actually, sorry, then what was the meaning of the governance? What kind of duties were assigned to the government during that particular period? They were not constructing roads, they were not getting this electricity and all other things, right. They were not constructing schools also. So, basically this Nizamat, that right is known as Diwani and Nizamat, these were two different kind of functions, right. So, Diwani was land revenue collection rights. So, Nizamat was basically the rights over army, first thing, and the second thing, they had judicial duties. Getting my point? So, the king was supposed to be the head of the state, judicial head of the state also, right. So, they had to perform this duty. So, once they took the Nizamat in their own hand, so now they had to perform the judicial services, they had to provide the judicial services. Now, it was very tough task to them, because they did not understand the Indian legal system. So, somehow what they could do, they started taking the help of Pandits and Maulvis, because they were the people who knew laws, right. But they got very soon, they got confused. The Pandit was giving the interpretation every time differently. If there is a case coming of Brahman, there was a different interpretation. If there was a case coming of Shudra, and the case is all same, the interpretation was different, right. So, now they got very confused, बोला ऐसे तो काम नहीं चलेगा यार, ऐसे कब तक चलेगा काम, ठीक है. Then they thought कि पंडित और मौलवी हमें बेवकूफ़ बना रहे हैं, ठीक है. So, now they thought of understanding the Indian society, right. And in fact, you know one thing that you must understand, whenever you are talking about the societies, right, or you are just need to perform such kind of duties, one thing that you need to always understand, without understanding the values in the society, you won't be able to understand their culture, their system, their legal traditions, right. I am just giving one example. There was a fellow from England, right, and that fellow came to India just for a tour. And then what happened in India, you do chori wori bahut hote hai. So, somehow he was just robbed, or anything happened to him, he lost everything, right, except the passport. He was not having a single penny, or maybe some penny, but he did not have the money that to buy a ticket, return ticket, and to go back to home, right. And then he called up his mother, and his mother said ki okay, it's so actually pathetic that something happened, like something that happened to you. So, now there is no alternative, you just do one thing, you join a job, right, just do something there for a couple of days, try to earn that much money that you can buy the return tickets and come back to home, right. And now I am just reversing the story, right. Same happened to an Indian fellow who went to England, right, and then what happened, the same kind of incident happened to him, and he also called up his mother, a father also, right, and the next flight was catched by her his parents, right, and they reached there and they brought back his son or her son, right. So, both the stories are correct, right, but do you think that any value is wrong? What was done by their parents, right, the English parents, is that wrong? No. And what is done by the Indian parent, that is also not wrong. India में तो कहते हैं जब तक लड़की की शादी नहीं हो जाए तब तक जिम्मेवारी हमारी होती है, parents की होती है, ठीक है. So that is also not wrong. What is the moral of the story? values are always different in two different societies, right? And that is why just by their values, just through their values, they could not run the legal systems in India, right? And that is why they needed to learn or understand the Indian system. And what was the best way out for that? क्या कर सकते थे वो? Reading law books, right? So for reading the law books, they needed to translate it, and that is what they did actually. What they did actually, they just thought ki it's the best way to understand the Indian culture, Indian values, Indian societies in a shorter span of time to translate their books into English, and that is where they established Asiatic Society, right? So the first Asiatic Society established in Bengal, 1784, right? And then in Bombay, and finally in Britain. And what was the task assigned to the Asiatic Society? Very simply, the Asiatic Society has been assigned the task to translate the books, right? And the another task was to teach the civil servants into the vernaculars, right? So basically, the vernacular languages were taught to them, to the civil servants. That was a different function. Translations became one of the prime function for the institution, right? And now, what books might have been preferred by them? Manusmriti. Why Manusmriti? Because Manusmriti was supposed to be the law book for the Hindus, right? Sariyat, law book for the Muslims, right? What else? Bhagavad Gita. To understand Indian society, you need to learn Bhagavad Gita also. So I hope you are getting my point. Ki what they did actually, they started translating the books to understand, in order to understand the Indian society, Indian culture, right? And somehow after a shorter period of time, they had huge compilation, because there were few people, those who kept on working in that only. I hope you must be knowing about that fellow from Germany, Max Muller. Max Muller translated around 50 books from India and China. Right. So there were so many people, those who started, Wilkins is there, Williamson is there, right? They all started translating some of the books, and over the period they had a huge compilation of such kind of translations, right? And once they got such kind of compilations, right, then they thought ki, they had another objective, because by that time they have started ruling on India. Because when they compiled all those kind of things, by that time they have started ruling on India, and once they decided to rule on India, that process of colonization has started. Then they thought in a way ki, look, they never claimed this thing, or they never accepted this thing ki they are ruling on India because of their own interests or benefit. They simply said ki no, we are the white people, right? And we are ruling on India. Why? Because Indian people are barbaric and uncivilized, and this is the task or the duty of the white people to civilize such kind of barbaric people. So it means, but do you think that this idea is applicable to India? This was very much applicable to Africa, very much applicable to America also, right? Because there definitely this the tribal traditions were there, tribal culture was there. तो वहाँ पे तो करता काम ये, ठीक है? इंडिया में तो उनको शर्म आ रही थी बोलने में कि यार ऐसा कैसे बोल दे कि ये लोग बारबेरिक है, ठीक है? Now that idea, that claim could not be fit, and that is why they needed some machines, they needed some sort of tools through which they could prove the Indian Indian society as a barbaric and uncivilized society, right? And that's the purpose. They decided to write some of the books on Indian history. Writing those kind of books, they just wanted to prove that Indian society is a backward society, right? And in that process, what they did actually, they first claimed that Indians were never aware of their history. To some extent, true, that is true also, right? Indians were actually not aware of their history, right? Because Indians were living in a different world, ठीक है? उधर की दुनिया में रहते हैं, मतलब नीचे नहीं रहते हैं, ठीक है? बहुत बड़ा प्रॉब्लम इंडियंस के साथ थी, है भी, ठीक है, जो भी कह लीजिए, ठीक है? So somehow Indians had this problem. What else? The another important thing which was discussed by them. Sorry, social levels. That's coming slightly later. So first they are saying that Indians were not aware of their history, right? And the second important thing, whatever the glorious phases were there in Indian history, right? They always claim that these developments were because of the Western people, such as Aryans, right? As we do know that Indian society developed from the Aryans, that is how we understand, right? And they said that Aryans, who were the Aryans? They were coming from Europe only, right? So somehow IVC, Indus Valley Civilization, or the Harappan civilization. That was also one of the glorious phase of Indian history, and they said no, it was not their own or indigenous development, it was basically because of the migration of the Mesopotamian people to the India, right. So, they started writing or interpreting the history as per their own convenience, right, because they simply tried to prove one thing, that Indians were never capable of they knowing their history, and they were never capable of generating such kind of developed civilization, and that is the reason they have started giving such kind of interpretation. But while telling these kind of things, what they did actually, they simultaneously claimed one thing, that Western people were already aware of what exactly history is, whether the Indian people never knew what exactly history is, right. And that is why they said there was no as such history book, right, that has been written so far in India, and they whatever the ideas have been given by given as counter argument, such as some talked about like I mean to say Puranas, right. So, Puranas they found a sort of history. This is the question which was asked in the paper also, right. So, they found a sort of history in Puranas, right, but they denied this idea. Kalhana's Rastarangini was also denied, right, or the history books which were written during the medieval period, these were also denied. So, once all such kind of ideas were denied, it means ki the notion of history that got changed by the 19th century, right, and that is the reason because of what we need to understand ki what exactly history was in their own perspective, right. So, now just leave that question. I hope you got the point ki why they have why did they start writing the history of India? That is one important question that must be answered. So, I hope you got the point ki why they have decided to write the history of India. But now the another question which is coming here ki what is history? In that case we need to understand the nature of history. Look, if we will talk about history in a very simplistic way, in that case you will find normally it has been said ki history is the study of past. That is the very ideal definition which is spoken by most of the people, that is how we just try to represent the history. But I think that is partially true, or I must say that is not 100% true, because history is not the sort of study of past, because numbers of things happen in past, right, and that is why all the things are not very important. And then she said ki okay, some significant event, right. So, once I say some significant event, so how can we decide that this event is significant and this is not? And in that case we can say ki now there is a formal way through which we can understand about that. If we will talk about history, or the sorry, just let it be history, let us talk about what we are talking just now. So, I just told you some events from the past, right. So, if the events of the past, so how can you events from past, right. So, now if it is there, how can we define the event, right, that this event is important, this is not important. In this process we can do one thing. Normally in history we study about किसके बारे में पढ़ते हैं हिस्ट्री में? किसकी पॉलिटी, किसकी पॉलिटी, किसकी सोसाइटी? नहीं, वर्ल्ड हिस्ट्री भी तो है. आई एम जस्ट टॉकिंग अबाउट सिंपली हिस्ट्री. तो क्यों मेरी हिस्ट्री को नहीं पढ़ेंगे आप? महात्मा गांधी कोई वो रूलर्स थे क्या? Human being, right? That's the right answer. We read the history of human being because there is a history of everything. The earth is also having a history. Do you read that? No, no. The sort of every sort of development in science, that is also having a history. If you are talking about robotics, that's also having a history. Agriculture, that is also having a history, right? Everything is having its own history, right? But we are not studying everything. We are simply trying to study of human being, or we are trying to study about the society, right? So, society is the prime concern of us, right? So, basically we people are studying about the society, right? Whenever you are talking about society, just now we people were talking about numbers of things. Now you can include those things in that, right? So, every society is having a political aspect. Isn't that true? Every society is having a political aspect. हर सोसाइटी में कुछ ना कुछ होता है जिसको हम बोलते हैं पॉलिटिकल है. जैसे अभी के सोसाइटी में कैसी पॉलिटी है? डेमोक्रेसी है. Sometimes there was a monarchical system, sometimes there was a feudalism, right? So, there is a system, right? And even if you talk about a tribal culture, there is a political structure, right? आपने बहुत बार सुना होगा कि जो वो पिक्चर अगर हिंदी मूवीज़ देखते होंगे पुरानी वाली, ठीक है, तो उसमें हीरो हीरोइन कई बार घर से भाग जाते थे, ठीक है, और भागने के बाद जंगल में फंस जाते थे, और जंगल में उनको कोई ट्राइबल कम्युनिटी पकड़ लेता था, और जब ट्राइबल कम्युनिटी पकड़ लेता था तो फिर नाच गाना होता था ये सब, ठीक है, और उसके बाद फिर क्या होता था, एक सरदार भी होता था उसमें, राइट. Every tribal community is also having a political structure. Maybe it's a very proto phase of the political structure, but it is there, right? So every society, irrespective of its development, it's having a political aspect. What else apart from politics? Sorry, economy. Every society is having a economic aspect as well, and I think you do understand the importance of economy. And we are not talking about the economy in a narrow perspective. We are just talking about economy in a broader perspective. Society is basically having a mode of hunting and gathering. Society is pastoralist, agriculturist, right, feudal society, and then mercantilist society, capitalist society, right. So numbers of broad terms are there to define just the economy of the period, right. So that's the another important aspect of the society, right. What else after economy? Sorry? Yes. In case of human society, you can't avoid this particular aspect, because in fact, in case of India, this is the most important aspect. At least in the present scenario, this is the most important aspect of the society, right. So religion is very important, right. And in fact, religion is also one of the thing. In fact, there is a sort of utility of the religion also, because of what you find that most of the people are following any of the religions, right. So religion is the another important aspect of the society, right. Then what next?
So patriarchy or matriarchy?
These are part of society only, right. Patriarchy, matriarchy, ठीक है. Simply say society. Now it includes culture, values, everything, right. So that's the society. So look, all these are the important aspects of history, right. Now what is happening, if any event, I was just trying to define how the significance, right. Any event which is putting impact over these different aspects, or even any of the aspects of the society, then that event is important. Got my point? So if I went to watch a movie yesterday, that might not be important, because it is not putting impact over this, right. But yesterday when I went to watch a movie, and then something happened as such that I had a clash with somebody, right, and he was a political leader, and then I started to go for a protest, right, and I protested against that, and finally that turned into a revolution, right. So that event is important, right. So it can be decided, it can vary actually, right. So yesterday I went to watch a movie. After watching the movie, I had my dinner, I came back, nothing important, right. But if something happened like that, right, that might be important. Like there's a popular historian E.H. Carr, he's just telling us one story. There was a fellow Mr. X, maybe Mr. X, and there was a fellow Mr. Y, ठीक है. So okay, what happened, Mr. X was just went for a party, right, and Y was actually in his place only. X was highly drunken, ठीक है, ज़्यादा पी लिया उसने, X ने, and then he was coming back to his place. Meanwhile, what happened, Y suddenly realized कि now he is not left with any single cigarette, और बिना सिगरेट के रात को नींद नहीं आती थी इसको, ठीक है. So finally he decided to buy cigarette, right. So he came down from his place and he had to cross the road. He had to cross the road, right, and just because of that, what he did actually, he was just trying to cross the road. That is the time when X was crossing, that is that particular zone, with his car, and somehow the light was dim, the road was not perfectly, right, and because of that ultimately one accident happened and Mr. Y died, right. And after that, if it is the story stopped there only, then there is no significance. But after that, what happened, the people became very furious, became very angry. They started protesting against that, against the government, and finally the government had to resign. Now this event is important, right. So somehow is saying that the events are changing its meaning, the story will be used again. I'll let you know the importance of story again also, right. So somehow you got the point कि any event which is putting the impact over these aspects of society, that event is important. Now I hope you are getting the point कि why we study about the French Revolution. Why? Because French Revolution had many impact over different aspects of society, right. Why do we study about the First World War? Because the same is true. right? So why we study about any such kind of things, because it is important in order to, the reason because they have, they are putting much impacts over these aspects of society, and then we are just collecting those events. We are just collecting those events, right? But do you think that the collection of events is all about history? Okay, fine, I have collected, okay, this happened on this happened on this happened on this, and that is how we just collected the, events, right? So do you think that this is history? This is also not history, because the collection of events is not very important. Anybody can collect the events on the basis of sources. Then what is the next thing which is making it important? What happened in the First World War? That might not be important. What were the circumstances because of what the First World War happened? That might be important, right? Or what were the impacts of the First World War? That might be important. It means that the interpretation of that event is important, right? The interpretation of that event is important. To what exactly happened, or the timeline or the chronology of the events are not important. Most of the people, you might have noticed one thing, when you people are reading the books, you are just marking the dates, figures and names. This is what you are underlining in your book. So what I am trying to convey you, this is not what you are underlining, that is not history, right? So if you are underlining these kind of things, stop underlining these kind of things, because this is not important at all in history. If anybody does think, right, that okay, these dates, figure, names are history, definitely not, right? It is all about the interpretation, right? If French First World War happened, what were the reasons? Or if the French Revolution happened, what were the reasons behind the French Revolution, right? Or what were the outcomes of the French Revolution, results of the French Revolution? That might be important for history, because ultimately there is a single, point of studying history, that we just want to learn something from the past, right? That we can rectify the present and we can make the future better. That is the very simple reason. Every discipline which is being taught in university is having certain practical utility, and just because of that purpose, that is included in the subject. Otherwise, in the universities, otherwise what is the point of, investing such, big amount of money for these kind of things, right? So ultimately we have to learn something from the past. So we are learning about the caste system or the evolution of the caste system, then only we can decide something better for the caste system in future. हमें जब पता ही नहीं कि कास्ट सिस्टम कैसे आया या गोत्रास क्या होते, how can we decide about that? Getting my point? So somehow these are the things which are making the, making the history very important, and in fact this is how you need to understand the history. But somehow this is not all about history that I'm supposed to deal. There are so many things still left that has to be discussed for history, but I am just leaving it here only. Tomorrow, in tomorrow's class, I will continue the rest of the discussion, the real sense of the history and some other, historiography and some other things we need to discuss, so many things, right? But before, that I would like to just tell you one thing, okay, this, this particular program is beginning with paper 2, right? So, it will begin with world history, then modern India and then ancient and medieval, right? So, that is one of the information that I was just wanted to convey, right? So, paper 2 and then paper 1 we will be doing in that way. Any other question, query if you have, you can ask to me.
Sir, I want to ask that current events से कितने questions आते हैं, जो current events से हो रहे हैं, तो उससे कैसे question आते हैं?
Look, they are not asking directly the questions from the current event, but these are giving insight to you, right? Okay, if this question is there, in fact, I will be dealing with the paper on Friday, right? The nature of the questions, how to deal with the questions, right? So why don't you join the session only, right? 12 to 30. So I will be dealing with these kind of things, right? Any other question, if you have any doubt, any query, if you have, you can ask to me. No question. Very good. So, okay, in that case, tomorrow 4:30.